Japan's oldest doctor issues a serious warning to seniors. Never eat this fruit for breakfast. One single sentence. A whole country on alert. What seemed harmless turned into a reason for investigation. Millions started their day with it and end up paying a high price. Sleepiness, fatigue, silent illnesses. But no one suspected the true origin of the problem. Behind a common routine, a mistake repeated for decades. And now a long-lived doctor with authority and experience reveals what he saw in the bodies and exams of his patients. What actually happens inside an elderly person's body upon waking? Why do certain foods, even natural ones, become enemies after 60? And what should you put on your plate before it's too late? Get ready to review everything you thought you knew about morning eating. This episode could change how you start your days and how you age. So welcome to another episode of Sanaya Sensia, where you will discover which fruit you should never eat for breakfast. Dr. Haruki Tanaka, first of all, what happened in Japan? It seems that a simple statement you made about food caused a true media earthquake. We are talking about a country with one of the longest living populations on the planet, and yet you managed to surprise even the most traditional ones. Can you tell us exactly what was said?
Yes, of course. What I said was, never eat this fruit for breakfast. Just that. But that sentence was enough to trigger an alert across the entire country. Because we are used to seeing fruits as healthy foods by definition, which is true in many cases. But there are contexts where certain foods, even healthy ones, can become true traps, especially for the elderly. And breakfast, specifically, is one of those critical contexts.
It's curious how our minds automatically associate fruit with something always beneficial, right? It's almost automatic. If someone says they ate fruit in the morning, the response is already, "Oh, that's great." But it seems the story is more complex. What motivated such a strong warning from you?
Decades of observing my patients' eating patterns. Many of them came to the office with blood sugar problems, morning tiredness, insulin spikes, growing belly fat, and all this even with apparently healthy habits. That's when I began to investigate what they had in common. And to my surprise, most of them consumed the same fruit right after waking up. That triggered a red flag.
So it's not just a theory, it's something based on your clinical practice. And the impact of this on the elderly population was big, right?
Very big. Because in Japan we have a traditional food culture, but also a dangerous modernization of habits. Many elderly people swapped miso, brown rice, and fish for toast with jam and sweet fruits right after waking. This created a worrying metabolic scenario: insulin resistance, silent inflammation, and energy drop right in mid-morning.
It's shocking to think something so common could be sabotaging so many people's health. But you said it was just a sentence, short and direct. Was that intentional?
Yes, because sometimes an impactful sentence is the only way to wake people up. We need to shake some absolute truths. Of course, not every fruit is dangerous. Not every breakfast with fruit is bad. But there is a specific type that, on an empty stomach, can be especially harmful. And that's what I want to warn about, mainly those over 60.
Well, you started strong. And I think many people now are wondering, do I eat this fruit every day? The answer will come along our conversation. But here's the warning. Prepare to review your morning habits. Dr. Tanaka, breakfast is often called the most important meal of the day. We grow up hearing this. But what you are saying puts this concept in check. What's wrong with traditional breakfast?
The problem isn't breakfast itself. It's how it's been done. In recent decades, what was a nutritious, light, balanced meal has turned into a parade of disguised sugar. White breads, fruit juices, industrial jams, breakfast cereals. All this causes a glucose explosion right in the first hours of the day, something the body, especially an elderly one, is not prepared to deal with fasting.
In other words, while we think we're doing everything right, drinking orange juice, eating a little bread with margarine and a banana, we may actually be starting the day with an overload on the body?
Exactly. The body fasting is in a state of maximum sensitivity. What you put inside during the first hours of the day sets the metabolic pattern for the next 6 to 8 hours. If you start with sugar or high glycemic index foods, You create a peak followed by a sharp drop. This causes fatigue, irritation, early hunger, and a tendency to store fat.
So what seemed like a healthy wake-up turns into a kind of hormonal roller coaster?
Perfectly. And this roller coaster is especially harmful for older people. The metabolism is already slower, insulin production less efficient, and the body's compensation mechanisms are weakened. In other words, what is bad for any age is even more dangerous after 60.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, a question many have. Why did breakfast become this trap? Was it industry, modern routine, culture?
A mix of all this. The food industry shaped breakfast based on convenience and palatability, not health. And this was widely accepted because it fits the fast rhythm of cities. Everything fast, everything sweet, everything ready to consume. But the price is high. We are getting sick quietly.
And many don't even notice, right? People feel sleepy after breakfast, think it's normal. Hungry 2 hours later, think it's normal. But maybe what they consider their pattern is actually a clear sign of metabolic dysregulation.
Exactly. The ideal breakfast doesn't cause sleepiness, nor early hunger. It brings satiety, steady energy, and mental clarity. But to get that, we need to understand how the body responds to what we put on the plate upon waking. And here we enter an essential point: the role of sugar first thing in the morning.
Dr. Tanaka, now that we understand breakfast can be a trap, let's get straight to the point. What exactly happens to an elderly person's body when they consume sugar right in the morning? What is the physiological response of that organism?
Great question. Let's imagine the body as a machine that just turned on after hours of overnight fasting. Upon waking, cortisol levels are naturally elevated, which already promotes an increase in blood glucose to supply energy to the body. If at that moment you ingest a food rich in sugar, like a very sweet fruit or juice, you multiply this glucose peak. The result: the pancreas acts quickly, releasing insulin in large amounts to handle the excess.
And this insulin, which is an essential hormone, becomes a problem when in excess?
Yes. Insulin in repeated peaks over time is associated with insulin resistance, inflammation, and visceral fat accumulation. But what few people know is that the impact of sugar early in the morning is even more severe for those over 60. Because with age, glucose metabolism slows, and the pancreas's ability to handle these peaks decreases. The result: a silent and progressive increase in insulin resistance.
So sweet breakfast might be speeding up the path to type 2 diabetes, especially among the elderly.
Exactly. And that's not all. Morning sugar also affects the nervous system. After the initial peak, there's a sharp glucose drop, which causes sleepiness, irritability, mental confusion, and even anxiety. Many elderly people complain of a feeling of cloudiness in the head or sluggishness after breakfast, and think it's just aging. But in reality, it's the body reacting badly to sugar at the wrong time.
This is very revealing, because most people associate that morning sluggishness with age, not diet. But from what you're explaining, maybe what ages us isn't time, but what we put on the plate early.
Perfectly. I often say, aging is inevitable, but getting sick while aging is optional. And what you eat in the first hours of the day can be the biggest factor of protection or aggression to your body. And here fruits have a double role. They can be allies or true traitors.
Dr. Tanaka, you just mentioned something that caught my attention. Fruits can be traitors. That contradicts almost everything we learned about healthy eating. After all, who hasn't heard that fruit is always a good choice, especially at breakfast?
That's one of the biggest modern nutritional traps. Fruit itself isn't the villain. The problem is the context in which it's consumed. At breakfast, fasting, many fruits rich in fructose and with high glycemic index cause a much more aggressive impact on metabolism than when eaten during the day with a balanced meal. And this is especially true for seniors.
In other words, it's not the fruit itself, but the moment and way it enters the body that defines if it will do good or harm.
Exactly. What we need to understand is that not all fruits are equal. Some have a high sugar load, fast absorption, and almost no fiber. Others, like berries, have low glycemic index and high antioxidant content. The problem is that the morning habit of consuming sweet fruits fasting and without any source of fat, protein, or fiber turns a food that could be healthy into a trigger for metabolic dysregulation.
And there's also the detail. Many times the morning fruit comes in juice form, which worsens the situation, right?
Perfect. Juice strips fiber, concentrates sugars, and allows even faster absorption. For example, a glass of orange juice may contain the sugar of 3 or 4 oranges. Imagine the impact of that on the pancreas of a 65-year-old person who already has a slower pancreatic function. It's like punching the metabolism right after waking.
And the industry reinforces the idea that fruit is always light, always good, with slogans and packaging that associate fruit with healthy living, well-being, summer.
Yes, the reputation of fruits was built as if they were always harmless. But we must separate marketing from physiological reality. The body doesn't respond to the label, but to its biochemistry. And in the case of sweet fruits fasting, the elderly body responds with stress.
So the idea that fruit is always the best way to start the day needs urgent revision.
No doubt. Fruits can continue being part of the diet, but at the right time, in the right combo, and with awareness. And from now on, we'll talk about the one that has been the most problematic of all.
Dr. Tanaka, you've been building a very clear argument so far. And now we come to a delicate part, the fruit that seems harmless but has caused big metabolic problems, especially in the elderly. Before revealing which one it is, can you explain why it's so treacherous?
Sure. This fruit is treacherous because it combines 3 dangerous traits for those who eat it fasting: high glycemic index, rapid digestion, and a false reputation for being light. It's sweet, soft, accessible, widely recommended by health professionals, and present on most tables. But what many don't know is that when consumed right after waking, it causes an intense glucose peak followed by a sharp drop. And that generates pancreatic stress and metabolic fatigue, day after day.
It's curious how something that seems light and natural can have such a heavy effect inside the body. You mentioned it digests quickly. Why is that a problem?
Because rapid digestion means fast glucose absorption, and that demands an equally fast and aggressive insulin response. The body has to rush to clear that sugar from the blood, releasing insulin in large amounts. Over time, this mechanism wears out. The pancreas works harder and harder to produce insulin, and the cell receptors start resisting it. It's the path to insulin resistance and, later, type 2 diabetes.
And this fruit specifically triggers this cycle?
Yes, often. I call it the traitor because it sneaks into the routines of people who think they're doing everything right, especially among the elderly, who often have more restrained diets and trust old recommendations based only on digestibility and mild taste.
Did you observe this clinically? Patients with blood sugar problems or obesity who ate this fruit frequently?
Countless cases. Patients with altered fasting glucose, sharp post-meal spikes, morning energy loss, growing visceral fat. And when I asked what they ate for breakfast, the answer was almost always the same: just a little fruit. That little fruit, in this case, was the silent culprit.
It's impressive how such a common choice can have such a deep and silent impact. I imagine many are wondering now if they've been eating this fruit.
And they should ask themselves that, because the next step is to understand how this fruit directly affects the cellular aging process, and why, over the years, it can speed up something many try to avoid: premature aging.
Dr. Tanaka, you mentioned a point that calls a lot of attention: the relationship between diet and cellular aging. And as I understand, this traitor, fruit plays a direct role in this process. Can you explain how this happens?
Sure. Cellular aging is deeply linked to how the body handles sugar. When there are frequent blood glucose spikes, the body produces more insulin and initiates a process called glycation. Glycation is the binding of sugar to proteins, forming structures called ages, advanced glycation end products. These agents damage tissues, inflame the body, and accelerate cellular aging.
So every time a person consumes excess sugar, especially in the morning, they are, in a way, rusting their body inside?
That metaphor is perfect. It's like sugar oxidizes the internal gears of the body, and over time, this silent oxidation affects skin collagen, blood vessel elasticity, kidney function, eyes, and even joints. The funny thing is many people worry about external wrinkles, but don't realize they are aging inside, at the cellular level.
And the fruit we are talking about contributes directly to this scenario?
Yes, because it has one of the most dangerous combinations: high fructose content and fast absorption. Fructose, unlike glucose, is metabolized directly in the liver, and when consumed in excess, especially fasting, it causes liver overload and increases triglyceride production. This is linked to fatty liver, inflammation, and accelerated biological aging.
This completely changes how we look at breakfast, because often this fruit comes with other mistakes, like white bread, coffee with sugar, or sweetened yogurt.
Exactly. And that's the combo I see most in clinics. People start the day with a glycemic bomb, without proteins, without fibers, without good fats. The body reacts trying to balance all that, but over the years, this constant effort pays a high price. More inflammation, more fatigue, less vitality.
And this explains why many people with apparently healthy eating habits still age badly, with more pain, more tiredness, more metabolic diseases.
Yes, because aging well is not just living longer, it's maintaining functionality, mental clarity, and energy. And all this starts with what you eat, especially when you wake up. That's why, in the next chapters, we'll go deeper into how this fruit contributes to visceral fat and what we can do to reverse this scenario.
Dr. Tanaka, visceral fat is one of the biggest health nightmares after 60, right? It doesn't show in the mirror like subcutaneous fat, but it's there, silent and dangerous, surrounding the organs. How does this, apparently harmless, fruit relate to this type of fat?
This is one of the most dangerous, and at the same time ignored, connections. The fructose present in some fruits, especially the one we're discussing, has a direct effect on the liver. When consumed in excess, especially in the morning and fasting, it overloads the liver and favors lipogenesis, that is, fat production. And this fat, instead of being eliminated, accumulates in the abdominal cavity, around organs like the liver, kidneys, and intestines.
So it's no exaggeration to say that a simple morning habit can be feeding a silent inflammation process at the body's core?
Not at all. Visceral fat is metabolically extremely active. It releases inflammatory substances, interferes with hormonal balance, increases cardiovascular risk, and is associated with cognitive decline. And unfortunately, it grows from small habits that seem healthy, like a sweet and light breakfast.
That explains why many thin elderly people have a high metabolic risk. They think they're fine because they don't have a visible belly, but inside.
The scenario is different. It's possible to be slim outside and inflamed inside. Visceral fat is the portrait of this condition. One of the warning signs I often observe is when a patient says they wake up tired, feel sleepy right after breakfast, and have difficulty losing belly volume, even with diet. In many of these cases, the traitor fruit is present in the morning routine.
What's even more worrying is that most believe they're taking care of their health by eating that fruit. It's like the enemy disguised as an ally.
Exactly. The illusion of health is as dangerous as neglect, because when you think you're doing everything right, you don't change. And that stagnation, especially in elderly people, can be fatal. Visceral fat increases the risk of heart attack, stroke, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and all this can be fueled by an innocent little fruit at breakfast.
I imagine many are starting to look at their own morning plate with different eyes. But I also imagine they will ask, if I can't eat this fruit in the morning, when can I? And maybe even more importantly, is there a way to neutralize this effect?
That's an excellent question, and the answer lies in the next point: how combining it with other foods can completely change the body's response to this fruit.
Dr. Tanaka, until now you made it clear that this fruit, fasting, can have devastating effects, especially for those over 60. But what if someone doesn't want to give up fruit in the morning? Is there a way to consume it more safely?
Yes, there is. The secret lies in the combination. When you eat this fruit alone, fasting, it hits your blood like lightning. But if you accompany it with fiber, good fats, or proteins, fructose absorption is slower, the glycemic peak is reduced, and the metabolic impact is softened. In other words, the problem isn't just the fruit, it's the context in which it enters the body.
So the same fruit that causes chaos in the fasting body can be better tolerated if it comes with, say, a handful of nuts or a boiled egg.
Perfect. Good fats, like those in nuts, avocado, and olive oil, slow gastric emptying. Proteins help stimulate satiety hormones, like leptin, and better control insulin release. So a simple combination can completely change how the body responds to this fruit.
That's a relief for fruit lovers, right? No need to ban it, just learn how to fit it properly. Do you have practical examples of safe combinations?
Of course. For example, if someone likes to eat a slice of this fruit in the morning, they can accompany it with a spoonful of soaked chia seeds, a slice of cheese, or even plain full-fat yogurt without added sugar. Another option is to eat this fruit as dessert after lunch, when the body already has food in the stomach and the glycemic impact is much smaller.
That makes a lot of sense, because the main problem is the speed with which sugar enters the blood. Controlling this speed, the fruit stops being a problem.
Exactly. It's a matter of nutritional intelligence. Eating well isn't just choosing good foods, but putting them at the right time and in the right combination. And with this fruit, the common mistake is seeing it as light and safe enough to start the day. But that's not how the body sees it.
And as you said before, the body responds to biochemistry, not marketing. So eating consciously is the key, even with fruits.
Without a doubt. And to reinforce this idea, I want to bring a real case of a patient who had a health leap simply by removing this fruit from breakfast. The next chapter is about her, and it's a powerful example of how small changes bring big transformations.
Dr. Tanaka, we've reached a fundamental point in the conversation. Because many people listening now might think, but I eat apples or melon or grapes, they're sweet fruits but natural. It can't be that bad. And here comes a much talked about, but little understood term, glycemic index. Can you explain what it is, and why it's so important when choosing fruit?
Sure. Glycemic index, GI, is a measure that shows how fast a food raises blood glucose after being ingested. The higher the GI, the faster sugar enters the bloodstream. Fruits with a high GI cause intense blood sugar spikes, especially when eaten alone and fasting. This, as we have already said, can lead to insulin resistance and visceral fat accumulation.
So two fruits that are equally sweet in the mouth can have very different effects on the body depending on their GI?
Exactly. Not everything sweet has the same glycemic impact. For example, watermelon has a very high GI, even though it's mostly water. Strawberries, which are also sweet, have a very low GI. The problem is that the most dangerous fruits, like watermelon, grapes, and bananas, are precisely the most consumed at breakfast.
And here comes the deception. Because people think that since it's fruit, it's allowed, and forget to consider how the body processes that sugar.
That's right. The big deception of sweet fruits is thinking that natural flavor guarantees metabolic safety. But our body doesn't recognize natural or industrialized. It responds to the amount and speed with which sugar reaches the blood. And in this respect, many sweet fruits behave like true disguised candies.
Now, an important detail. GI can change depending on the stage of fruit ripeness, right?
Yes, and this is something few people know. A green banana, for example, has a lower GI than a ripe one. As fruits ripen, they lose fiber and increase the concentration of available sugar. Therefore, the riper it is, the sweeter and more dangerous it is for those with insulin resistance, or who are over 60.
Makes a lot of sense. So the ideal isn't to abolish all sweet fruits, but to understand which ones, how, and when to eat. And mainly, avoid those with higher GI early in the day.
Exactly. Breakfast isn't the best time to test the metabolic system. It's time to care, stabilize, protect, and choices made there impact the whole day. In the next chapter, I will tell you what I observed in my patients who ate that fruit daily, and the worrying pattern that repeated.
Dr. Tanaka, you already shared Mrs. Noriko's case, but now I want to expand that observation. You've treated many elderly patients over the decades. Was there a common pattern among those who ate that fruit every day?
Yes, and that was what caught my attention the most. Patients with exemplary habits who faced the same repeated symptoms: abdominal fat gain, elevated fasting blood sugar, sleepiness after breakfast, and gradual worsening of insulin resistance. When we investigated their diet, there it was, the traitor fruit present every day at breakfast, almost like a ritual.
The morning routine repeated like a silent self-sabotage pattern?
Perfectly, many said, but doctor, I just eat a banana in the morning or a little papaya. The intention was good, but the clinical outcome was always the same. The consistency of that habit caused a mild chronic inflammation, altered lipid profile, and in some cases, progression to prediabetes, even without family history.
That's extremely worrying, because no one suspects fruit. It seems light, natural, healthy, but you notice changes in tests too?
Yes. Routine exams started showing high triglycerides, fatty liver, altered fasting insulin, and slowly rising HbA1c. This even in people who didn't eat processed sweets, didn't smoke, and walked regularly. The only mistake was the morning choice, a fruit that instead of nourishing was undermining metabolic balance.
And the most curious thing is that it didn't raise suspicion, because when the patient is eating pure sugar, they know they might be overdoing it. But when they eat fruit, they think they're on the right path.
Exactly. The illusion of health is one of the biggest barriers to prevention. The body feels it, but the mind resists believing. When I suggested cutting or repositioning that fruit in the routine, there was even resistance at first. But the results speak louder. Many returned after 30 days saying, "It's like a switch was flipped in my body. I have more energy, sleep better, and my digestion also improved."
In other words, small changes generating big transformations. And once again, the warning remains, it's not about demonizing fruit, but understanding its impact inside a more sensitive organism, like an elderly one.
Perfect. And that's why, in the next chapter, I want to talk about what really sustains energy in the morning, and what knocks you down without you realizing.
Dr. Tanaka, one point you just mentioned caught my attention: the impact of breakfast on energy throughout the day. Many people have breakfast thinking it will fuel them for the entire day, but they end up feeling even more tired. What's going on there?
That's a common mistake. Most people think that what gives energy is what causes an immediate burst of energy. But actually, true energy comes from stability, not from quick stimulation. When you consume foods rich in sugar right after waking up, like high glycemic fruits or refined breads, you may feel an initial up, but it doesn't last long. Then comes the drop, and the body has to work twice as hard to try to rebalance itself.
In other words, that quick boost is fake. It's just a rebound effect that ends in tiredness, hunger, and often anxiety.
Exactly. What sustains energy throughout the morning are foods that release glucose slowly, steadily, and gradually. And for that, it's necessary to include sources of protein, good fats, and fiber. These nutrients keep you full, stabilize insulin, and feed the brain more efficiently.
And I imagine this becomes even more important as the years go by, because an older body no longer has the same tolerance to fluctuations, right?
Perfectly. After 60 years, the body becomes more sensitive to imbalances. Hormonal production falls, metabolism slows down, and regulatory organs, like the liver and pancreas, don't respond as quickly anymore. So what used to be just discomfort now becomes a real risk. The choice of breakfast can determine if the elderly will have a productive day or a dragged-out one.
And this affects even mood, focus, the willingness to move.
Yes, the brain is extremely sensitive to glucose swings. Sharp peaks and drops directly affect concentration, memory, and mood. Many patients report morning irritation, impatience, or a feeling of mental confusion. And the curious thing is that just adjusting breakfast, removing this fruit and balancing nutrients, makes everything better.
So true energy comes from stability, not explosion. That changes everything because many people confuse stimulus with vitality.
Exactly. Stimulus is temporary, vitality is built. And this building starts in the first meal of the day. In the next chapter, we will address a very direct topic. What are, after all, the 3 worst fruits to eat at breakfast, and why?
Dr. Tanaka, the time has come for the direct revelation. Which fruits should we avoid at breakfast, especially those over 60? I imagine many are curious, and maybe even a little apprehensive.
That's understandable. These fruits are popular, loved, and part of millions of people's breakfast. But it's important to remember, we're not saying they are poison. We are talking about context. Fasting, right in the morning, these fruits have a much more aggressive metabolic impact, especially in elderly people.
Perfect. So let's get to the list. What will be the 3rd place in this ranking?
In 3rd place, grapes. Small, sweet, practical, and extremely rich in fructose. The problem is that no one eats just 1 or 2 grapes. People eat bunches. Fasting, grapes promote a glycemic spike almost as high as processed sweets. And because they are easy to chew and swallow, they go unnoticed as a problem.
And there are still people who drink grape juice first thing in the morning, thinking they are doing a detox.
Exactly. Juice is even worse, because it concentrates the sugar from several grapes and removes all fiber. It's practically a natural syrup. It's no wonder many patients report sleepiness or early hunger after a natural grape juice.
And 2nd place, which fruit loses only to the champion?
The silver medal goes to watermelon. This fruit is mostly water, but its sugar is absorbed almost instantly. Watermelon's glycemic index is very high. It's like drinking liquid sugar. Fasting, it hits the blood like an explosive load, and the body responds with high insulin release.
It's shocking because watermelon symbolizes lightness. But now I understand. Light on the stomach, heavy on the pancreas.
Excellent definition. Now we arrive at the champion. The fruit I found most often in the morning routine of my patients with altered blood sugar, visceral fat, and recurring tiredness. Papaya. Simple, sweet, cheap, soft, and dangerous on an empty stomach.
The famous papaya, present in almost every elderly person's breakfast worldwide.
Exactly. Papaya has a high concentration of fructose, fast absorption, and almost no glycemic break when consumed alone. It tricks with its mild flavor and digestive reputation. But fasting, the effect is devastating, especially for those who already have insulin resistance or fatty liver.
Now everything you said so far makes sense. And in the next chapter, the final reveal, why papaya, whole or in juice form, might be sabotaging your health. Dr. Tanaka, now it's revealed, papaya is the fruit that most harms elderly people's morning health, especially fasting. But there is still a doubt for many listeners. Why does papaya harm, whether in juice or whole? Can you explain this impact directly?
Of course. Papaya is a fruit with a high fructose content, a type of natural sugar that, when consumed excessively, directly overloads the liver. Unlike glucose, which is metabolized by the whole body, fructose goes almost entirely to the liver. And when this consumption happens right after waking, with nothing in the stomach, the body is caught by surprise. The response is a glucose spike, exaggerated insulin release, and the start of a silent inflammation process.
And what happens in the body after that? What does the person feel?
At first, almost nothing. That's exactly why the effect is treacherous. The person even feels lightness because papaya is soft and easy to digest. But about an hour later, the first drop comes: sleepiness, early hunger, loss of concentration. Over time, the body starts accumulating visceral fat, and tests start to show changes: high triglycerides, increased fasting blood sugar, signs of insulin resistance.
And when papaya turns into juice, does it get worse?
A lot worse, because making juice removes the fibers, the only element that helps slow sugar absorption. Without fibers, fructose goes straight into the blood. And since juice usually uses more fruit than a whole portion, the glycemic impact multiplies. It's like drinking a liquid sweet, thinking you're doing a detox.
And that's what impresses me, because papaya is present in the breakfast of millions of elderly, even in hospitals, clinics, and hotels, as if it were the ideal standard of a light and healthy meal.
Unfortunately, this reputation doesn't match the body's biological response. Papaya alone, fasting, is a chronic mistake, and the older the body, the bigger the damage. If combined with bread, margarine, coffee with sugar, we have a perfect scenario for silent metabolic inflammation.
From this point, I believe many listeners will rethink their morning habits. And the most important thing is to understand, it's not about prohibition, but repositioning. Papaya can even have its place, but not fasting, not as the first thing of the day.
Perfect. And to understand why this impact is so strong in the elderly, let's now talk about metabolic changes that aging causes, and why sugar becomes an even bigger problem over the years.
Dr. Tanaka, so far it's clear that sugar, even coming from fruit, can have very negative effects. But you emphasize that it worsens with the passing of years. Why does the elderly body react differently to sugar? What exactly changes?
That's an essential question. With aging, metabolism becomes less efficient. There's a natural reduction in insulin sensitivity, a drop in muscle mass, the main consumer of glucose, and a decrease in mitochondrial function. In other words, the body burns less sugar and stores more. This means even small amounts of glucose, like those from fruit, have an increased impact.
So what was easily tolerated before, a fruit juice in the morning, a sweet snack in the afternoon, now turns into something potentially dangerous?
Exactly. Young people still have metabolic stamina to deal with excess. But the elderly body already has slower, less sensitive compensation mechanisms. That's why the same fruit causing a mild spike in an adult can cause a severe spike in an elderly person. And the problem is that these spikes, repeated daily, accelerate internal aging.
And this happens even without obvious symptoms, right? The person thinks everything is fine until a test shows high blood sugar, prediabetes, or fatty liver.
Perfect. Metabolic inflammation in the elderly tends to be silent. It doesn't hurt, itch, or cause fever, but it slowly wears out organs. Besides, the liver loses efficiency, the pancreas overloads, and the intestine also reacts poorly to these spikes. All this compromises the elderly person's global health, even if they feel normal.
And I imagine many elderly people are still stuck in the idea that fruit is always good, whole wheat bread is always light, and breakfast must be sweet. That makes habit change even harder, right?
Very much so. Changing a routine rooted for decades is not easy. That's why I always explain it's not a ban, but an adaptation to the new metabolism. The body has changed, and diet needs to change with it. Otherwise, what was healthy at 30 becomes poison at 70.
That's powerful. The idea that aging demands new habits, new choices. And diet, especially breakfast, is where this change needs to start.
Certainly. And in the next chapter, we'll see how this morning mistake can worsen even more when fruit is combined with other popular and equally dangerous breakfast foods.
Dr. Tanaka, you've made it clear that fruit alone, especially fasting, can be a serious problem. But now we enter an even more critical issue. What happens when this fruit is combined with other common breakfast foods? Does the situation get worse?
Yes, it gets worse, and a lot. Because what many elderly do, unknowingly, is create a highly inflammatory food combo right in the first hours of the day. Imagine this scenario: papaya on the plate, French bread or toast on the side, coffee with sugar, and a little pot of sweetened yogurt. It seems like a traditional breakfast, even light for some. But in practice, it's a glycemic and inflammatory bomb. Dr. Tanaka, now it's revealed, papaya is the fruit that most harms elderly people's morning health, especially fasting. But there is still a doubt for many listeners. Why does papaya harm, whether in juice or whole? Can you explain this impact directly?
It's the famous convenience combo. Everything quick, easy to chew, and culturally accepted. But combined, it turns the body into a metabolic pressure cooker.
Perfect. Each element of this combo has a high glycemic index. Bread and toast are made from refined flour. They turn into glucose almost immediately. Coffee with sugar raises this peak even more. Sweetened yogurt contains hidden sugars. And to complete, papaya. In other words, the body receives an intense sugar load with no metabolic protection.
And what would those protections be? Fiber, protein, good fats?
Exactly. Those nutrients are the brakes of metabolism. They slow absorption, prevent spikes, and sustain energy. But in the scenario we're talking about, there's none of that. It's just simple carbohydrates and sugar, all competing for quick absorption. The result is an insulin explosion, followed by a sharp drop in glucose, which leads to sleepiness, irritability, early hunger, and over time, weight gain and insulin resistance.
And the worst part, all this with foods that individually seem healthy. Yogurt is fitness, bread is whole grain, and fruit is natural. But together, they create a very dangerous scenario.
Yes, that's the big deception. It's not enough that the food seems healthy. It needs to behave that way inside the body. And when the combo is wrong, even good foods become harmful. Papaya, in this combo, is like the fuse of a chain reaction.
In other words, it's not just about what we eat, but with what and when we eat. That changes everything.
Completely. Breakfast needs to be rethought. And in the next chapter, we'll show that there really is an alternative path. Safe, accessible, and much more protective options to start the day well.
Dr. Tanaka, after so many warnings, many people might be wondering, okay, but what can I eat for breakfast then? Because removing fruit, bread, juice, yogurt, it seems like nothing's left. What are safe alternatives, especially for those over 60?
That's an essential question. And the good news is, yes, there are healthy, nutritious, and delicious options. The secret is to build a breakfast that doesn't cause glucose spikes, offers satiety, and provides steady energy. For that, we need 3 elements: proteins, fibers, and good fats. These are the pillars of a healthy metabolic morning.
Let's get to practical examples. If someone wakes up early and wants a breakfast that nourishes without harming, what can they put on their plate?
A simple and powerful suggestion: 2 scrambled eggs with extra virgin olive oil, accompanied by a slice of avocado with chia seeds. If they want something lighter, they can opt for plain full-fat yogurt without sugar, with ground flaxseed and a handful of nuts. Another option: a protein shake made with unsweetened plant milk, plant protein powder, cinnamon, and sunflower seeds.
Just hearing that makes me want to try it. And all that digests slower, right?
Yes, these foods promote gradual energy release. The body doesn't go into shock, insulin doesn't spike, and the brain gets stable fuel. Also, good fats help protect the liver, and fibers feed the gut microbiota, which also helps balance glucose.
And who misses something sweet in the morning? Is there a fruit that can fit in without harm?
Of course. Low glycemic fruits like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and unsweetened dried plums can be eaten in small amounts, always paired with protein or fat. For example, strawberries with natural yogurt or raspberries with almond butter. The important thing is to avoid eating fruit alone and fasting.
What I love about these options is that they are simple, accessible, and don't require big routine changes, just more awareness.
Exactly. It's not about eating less, but eating better. Replacing morning sugar with protein, good fat, and fiber is one of the smartest decisions an elderly person can make to preserve health.
And in the next chapter, I want to hear from you something even more direct. What exactly do you recommend instead of that fruit for those wanting to start a new routine tomorrow?
Dr. Tanaka, we've reached the point many have been waiting for since the beginning. What do you recommend, directly and practically, instead of that morning fruit that causes so many problems? What can someone over 60 put on their plate tomorrow morning without fear of making a mistake? My recommendation is simple and direct. Start the day with foods that stabilize your blood sugar, not those that disrupt it. Instead of papaya, for example, I suggest the first meal be based on proteins, good fats, and soluble fibers. These three elements offer constant energy, lasting satiety, and metabolic protection.
Let's get examples then. If someone usually eats papaya with black coffee and bread, what could they do instead?
They can swap it for scrambled eggs with turmeric and olive oil, accompanied by slices of avocado and some pumpkin seeds. If they want something lighter, they can prepare a smoothie with unsweetened plant milk, plant protein powder, cinnamon, and a spoonful of flaxseed. The important thing is the first meal of the day doesn't cause sugar spikes.
And if they still want fruit, is there a strategic way to include it?
Yes, as long as it's not the first thing consumed. Fruits like strawberries, raspberries, and plums can be eaten after a protein base. For example, after eating eggs or a shake, you can include a handful of berries. Fat and protein will soften the glycemic impact.
So basically, it's a matter of order and balance. Fruit isn't forbidden, it just needs to be in the right place, with the right partners.
Perfect. What I see most is people turning fruit into a villain or a savior. But it's just a food, and like any food, it needs to be in the right context. For elderly people, this care needs to be doubled. The body no longer tolerates repetitive mistakes.
And it seems you are a defender of simple, real food, no extremes. No fads.
Exactly. Protective food is the one that respects the body's biology, not the current trend. And when it comes to longevity, few decisions are as impactful as breakfast choice. Start the day right and you're halfway there.
In the next chapter, we'll do a general summary, a clear, practical, and direct recap of everything we've talked about, and the final warning for those over 60. Dr. Tanaka, after everything we've heard, it's impossible to look at breakfast the same way. And as we approach the end of this revealing conversation, I'd like to ask, can you summarize the most important points and leave a direct warning for those over 60?
Of course. The first thing that needs to be said is, what works for a young person can be dangerous for an elderly one. Metabolism changes, sugar tolerance decreases, and the impact of foods becomes deeper. The second point is many habits considered healthy are actually silent traps, and the clearest example is breakfast with sweet fruits fasting.
Especially papaya, which was the big villain of our episode.
Exactly. Papaya is the fruit I have observed most consumed daily by elderly people with metabolic problems. Fasting, it causes glucose spikes, pancreatic overload, increased visceral fat, and accelerated cellular aging. And when combined with white bread, sweetened yogurt, or coffee with sugar, the damage multiplies.
So the first step to change is recognizing the mistake. The second is replacing it intelligently.
Perfect. Replacement should prioritize proteins, good fats, and fiber. Eggs, avocado, seeds, natural yogurt, vegetables. They sustain the body, stabilize energy, and protect the brain. And if fruit is consumed, it should be low glycemic and always combined with other nutrients. Never alone, never fasting.
And this advice applies especially to those over 60, right?
Yes. My final warning is this. At 60, your body can no longer be treated like it's 30. What used to be just a slip can now be the start of a silent disease. And breakfast, being the day's first decision, is the most strategic moment to protect your health. Don't waste this opportunity with choices that will bring you down.
And for those who still insist on keeping papaya in their morning routine, what would you say?
I'd say, never start your day with that fruit again. Your body deserves to start with balance, not chaos. After 60, how you wake up defines how you'll age. And it all starts with what you put on your plate.
Dr. Tanaka, what a lesson in food awareness. Thank you for this rich, direct, and transformative conversation. And for those listening, if this episode made sense, share it with someone in this stage of life. It may be the alert they needed to change their destiny. And if you want to keep receiving the best videos for your health, subscribe to the channel because it exists for only one reason: to make you a healthier person with more quality of life. Helping you is my mission. In the video now showing on your screen, I reveal a leaf that destroys diabetes, fights bad cholesterol, and eliminates belly fat. Click the screen and check it out.